Welcome to the Provocateurs podcast, enabling you to think differently about leadership. Hello and welcome to the Provocateurs podcast. I'm Stuart Craner, co-founder of Thinkers 50. In Provocateurs, we explore the experiences, insights, and perspectives of inspiring leaders. Our aim is to provoke you to think and act differently through conversations with some fantastic people. Provocateurs is a collaboration between Thinkers 50 and Deloitte. So my co-host is Steve Goldbach. Steve leads Deloitte's sustainability practice in the US and is also the author, along with Jeff Tuff, of two best-selling books, Detonate, which came out in 2018, and Provoke, which inspired this podcast series. A new book from Steve and Jeff, entitled Hone, is published in September 2025. Steve, great to see you. And can you please tell us more about today's guest?
Great to see you, Stuart. I'm excited to be here as always. And I'm particularly excited for our guest today, Selassie Atadika. And I met Selassie at the Time 100 Climate Awards, where Selassie was a honoree, one of Time's climate honorees that evening, alongside amazing people like Mia Motley and Michael Bloomberg. And frankly, she stole the show. I was completely bowled over by her story, her achievements, and the broad scope of everything she does. She's got a diversity of activities that is super cool. She's an award-winning chef. She's a chocolatier, and I will attest to the fact that I'm not a chocolate fan, and they disappeared from our kitchen very, very quickly, including from me. She is a thought leader in redefining food systems through the lens of sustainability, biodiversity, and cultural heritage. She's the founder of Midunu, a nomadic dining concept, and Midunu chocolates, and has become a global advocate for sustainable agriculture and ethical trade. And she uses her platform to highlight the untapped potential of African foodways. Through her efforts, Selassie not only educates but inspires audiences to act, whether by supporting local food systems or advocating for sustainability in agriculture or rethinking roles in the global food landscape. Selassie, welcome. I would love, maybe just for a fun place to start, do you want to share the fun little story of how we came to meet at the Time dinner?
Well, I went to the Time dinner and my brother was my plus one. At the end of the night, we were just kind of going through like who were the people that we met that we were like are really interesting people that we need to follow up with. And he was like, you need to talk to Steve. And I'm like, I don't have Steve on my list. Did I meet Steve? And he was like, no, you didn't. I'm like, well, how is Steve's name on this list? He was like, I met him in the bathroom during like the intermission.
Indeed, your brother was next to me. It was next to me in the bathroom, and normally there's a rule. You don't talk to the person next to you in the bathroom. But somehow we got to chatting, and your brother was just such a wonderful and engaging person, and shared that it was right after your award. So he shared that he was with you, and we talked about our mutual love of food and the fact that back 100 years ago, my wife and I had a brief investment into a East Village restaurant, and we just started connecting over food. And as you mentioned, food is such a cultural influence that it brought a couple of guys together to talk about their love of food. And
I mean,
and
it
their
was at the end,
admiration.
it was the restaurant, it was sustainability, and it was writing. So it was, a lot of dots connected.
Indeed. Well, given all of what you do, how do you describe yourself? How do you describe what you do?
I know people always like, what's your title? I'm like, from which perspective? I think for myself, I like to say that I'm just a food advocate. I lead through deliciousness. That's what I do. I think when I talk about sustainable food systems, the only way we're going to win is through deliciousness, because once something tastes great, like everybody's on board.
I like that, leading through deliciousness. The world's going to sign up for that, surely. Can you explain a little bit more about Midunu and nomadic dining, the kind of origins of it, and what nomadic dining means?
Yeah, so I started the company Midunu in 2014. I moved back to Ghana after over a decade working with the United Nations and doing humanitarian work. And I really had all these amazing experiences around the continent that I felt I needed to share with others through a plate. Sadly, when a lot of people in the continent have a chance to travel, they're kind of going to Europe or to America, and we don't really know what our neighboring countries are doing. And so I wanted to give people a chance to experience this, but to also see the economies that we could actually create and problems we could solve by really getting to understand and fall back in love with our food. And so I started this dining concept in Accra, and the idea was sharing what I had tasted, seen with people here in Ghana, and using what I call my philosophy, New African Cuisine. And what that means to me is where we have culture, community, and cuisine intersecting with environment, sustainability, and economy. So when we eat what grows here, we are respecting the environment. When we eat what grows here, we are putting money back into the local economy. When we eat what grows here, we're respecting most likely our culture, and there are stories that come from that. And for me, the community that grows, but also the community that's consuming can interact. And so that's kind of what I was doing. I think a lot of people may have misinterpreted it as sort of like nouvelle cuisine or like the pretty cute plates of food. But for me, it's really about intentional plates, intentionally redesigning a food system that respects what is in front of us. And for me, when I came back, I'd been traveling around, I think I hit over 44 African countries at that time. And I was showcasing this food on a plate, and I wanted to share sort of this nomadic lifestyle that I'd had. And so the dining experiences started off by moving from location to location within Accra. We now have a sort of like a fixed home, but I'm also sharing this internationally. So doing dining experiences around the world, sharing the lessons that I've learned from the African kitchen, from plant forward to, communal dining and shared plates.
So my understanding is that, correct me if I'm wrong, but it's not only, certainly from the point of view of a North American and a European, a innovative cuisine, but certainly local cuisine, but it's an innovative business model. You're not there day in, day out. It's, you have to reserve a spot, or it opens periodically. How does the business model of Midunu work?
So there's two main components of it. First is dining experiences. Those are both, actually, I would say there's three components. There's the dining experiences, which is what people can experience in Accra, but also internationally. There's the chocolates that people can experience, and that right now is in the US and in Ghana. And the third piece is sort of our hidden piece, which is our research and documentation of what's happening in our food system. So what I realized is I really wanted to bring in local ingredients, particularly underutilized ones. And I saw that I didn't have that information. Everything was sort of handed down mother to child, or, and that connection was getting weaker and weaker. And so I needed to just kind of like go and meet Auntie so-and-so in the village, or, down the street, and start asking her questions. A lot of those queries have led me down paths that have taught me so much that I want to share. And it didn't make sense to keep that sort of as a traditional restaurant model. And I knew that doing a 9 to 5, 7 days a week was not going to allow me to do the research that was required to contribute to this conversation. So the dining experiences is a way for us to showcase our philosophy on a plate. The Institute is where we document the information and we're sharing that. The chocolates is also another way of sharing that, which is a bit more flexible and fits into what I call sort of, you take something people know, which is chocolate, and then you take what they don't know, which is some of the spices and the conversations around the ingredients in the continent, and it creates a space for a conversation, and it's much more accessible. We actually started exporting in 2020 during COVID, when people couldn't come to us for dinners, but we could share and give people a chance to travel around the continent through a box of chocolate. And that was also for me a way of having a conversation around, how do we fix systemic injustice within the cocoa industry? How do we look at doing things differently? So it's not a usual business model, but for me, it gives me the space to do the research while sharing the flavors with people for them to understand the conversation.
In some ways, Selassie, it strikes me that the issues you've raised in Africa actually apply in Europe and America as well. We've become distant from the traditional crops that grow here. I'm in England, and I expect to get my kiwi fruit from the supermarket, which have never grown here, and a host of things that don't grow here, and the stuff that does grow here, aren't fashionable anymore.
I mean, I was in the UK a couple of weeks ago, and I remember before getting on the plane, I had my last mango. I was like, I'm gonna go and experience what's there, and I was like really enjoying the berries, and I ate a lot of blackberries, and so for me, I try to be intentional about where I am and what that speaks to. I would say that my experience in Ghana has been interesting because I was born here. I grew up here for the first like 6 years or 5 years of my life, moved to the US. And when I came back 2014 full time, I realized that a lot of the food that I grew up eating, I didn't see. Growing up in the US, it was funny because like in elementary school, none of the kids really knew what to do with like myself and my siblings. They were like, they're from Africa, so they're thinking what questions to ask, right? So it was like, did you have a pet lion? Did you live in a hut? All these questions would come at us. And the only one I really entertained was, what did you eat? And I remember having a list of all these beautiful ingredients, particularly if I'm thinking about yam, cassava, plantain, all these dishes. And when I came back, all I saw was rice. There was another dish that my mom used to make that, I wanted to recreate. It uses blood from a goat. And so I was thinking, there's haggis, there's boudin, there's all these blood sausages that are around the world. I wonder how I could play with this dish into a sausage. I couldn't find anyone to teach it to me. And I was shocked, but I also realized that so much in our food system in Ghana had changed, and that needed to, I was just scared that, a lot of the things that I ate growing up would no longer exist. And the interesting thing is I've had this conversation with people around the world, and we're all suffering from the same thing. There are people who have had dishes from their grandmother, great grandmother, aunties, or, wherever, that they're not sure, or they see it also on the decline. So that's the one thing that brings us all together.
And one of the things that I can imagine that you think about doing is thinking about bringing foods with great heritages into the eating styles of today. Like food also progresses and is a showcase of our time. So how do you think about, having in your cooking and your approach to food systems, how do you think about having both a leg in the past and also a leg in the future, knowing that we've learned a lot about presentation and health, and how do you just balance that aspect in your food leadership?
I'm smiling because there's literally a principle in Ghana. We have these symbols. They're called Adinkra symbols. And there's one specific one. It's called Sankofa. And if you see it, it's an image of a bird. It looks like a chicken. And it's facing forward, and it has its neck turned back. And in the mouth is a golden egg. It's just an egg. And it means go back and get it. So the idea is that, there are lessons in the past. There are things from our past that we need to understand and respect, but they need to move forward. It's not about this super romantic idea of nothing changes. Everything is dynamic. Culture is dynamic. So in fact, I think what we have to do is evolve with what we have, or it's lost. So I'll take some of the ingredients I see in Ghana, right? So one of my favorite spices called precasse. It's a pod from a tree, and it's currently at risk of being endangered due to deforestation. They don't like to be planted in monocrop style. They need to be amongst other trees. So I love this spice, and I'm trying to use it as much as possible, because if we don't, it's going to be gone. So when I went to the market, I would ask women, when I first came back, because I hadn't seen it before growing up in the US, I said, what is it used for? And they said, oh, it's used for palm nut soup. So I'm thinking to myself, if we don't use it for something else, that's it. That's all the life that this one spice has. So I put it in chocolate. I put it in desserts. I use it as a dry rub on different types of dishes that I'm roasting or grilling. And therefore, this spice now has new legs that hopefully people can grab onto and be excited about. The first time most people have ever tasted precasse that are American, most people that I have it in my chocolates. I think a lot of the people who've had precasse in my chocolates, it's the first time they've ever had it. And it's interesting because someone like, Steve, like yourself, would be like, ooh, what is this thing? It's caramel, buttery notes, and, you're going to be interested by it. Somebody else is going to be like, ooh, it's on the Arc of Taste list, so I'm excited about it. Somebody else in Ghana will be like, it reminds me of the soup my grandmother made. So all of us are going to be excited about it for different reasons. And you might be a foodie that's never had this and like, wow, something I've never tasted in my entire life. I'm finally getting a chance to have it. There is a dynamism that needs to happen within there. And I think at the end of the day, if we want all of these things to survive, we need to make sure that whatever comes from our past has aspiration attached to it. So if you're in the village and someone is telling you to eat the same thing, by me zhuzhing it up and turning it into something, it becomes exciting. Perfect example, when I moved back to Ghana, fonio was not readily available here. Fonio is an ancient grain from West Africa. It's climate smart, really wonderful. I mean, if you read about it, it's kind of like, the quinoa of Africa, right? So it's this grain that does really wonderful things. But in Ghana, it was considered poor people's food. And even in the regions where it grows, it was really only consumed when millet was not available. So it was a lean seasoned thing that you ate because you had to. And so a lot of people don't want to touch it, right? Interestingly enough, fonio is now super cool in the West. And now Ghanaians are like, oh, wait, it's from here. Oh, well, let me try. Ghanaians were late adopters. So, whatever it takes to get us to the party, someone else has thought it's cool. It's aspirational now. Now people want to eat it. And so that's given it a new life. And it's interesting to see the conversation had to kind of go out and then come back in. But at the end, it was aspiration.
One of the things you've said, Selassie, is that food is more than a meal, but also a tool for transformation. And I think we're getting a sense of that from what you're saying. But can you explain a bit more why food is more than a meal and the transforming elements of it?
Yeah, absolutely. Food touches on almost every single aspect of our lives. When I even think about it from a point of view of like policy, most ministries and sectors are touched by it. And unfortunately, some people see it as survival and other people see it as just like a pure luxury. But if we break it down, most people hopefully are eating 2 times a day. There are those of us who are eating maybe like, lots of snacks in between. But, if we're saying that we're eating 2 to 3 times a day, that's a lot of money that's in the system globally. So what we eat, by choosing to eat something that is, we're stimulating an economy because we're paying for that ingredient. You're making choices about land use. You're making choices about who's growing, who's eating, who cannot eat. School feeding programs determine what we're growing. I'm trying to think, health outcomes are also linked to that. We've got culture that's coming through. We've got labor in terms of the type of food you eat and how you eat. So all of these things are interlinked. When I think about my experience in Ghana, some of the food systems choices, for example, rice was special occasion. The labor attached to growing rice changes. And so traditionally you didn't eat it all the time because it was expensive and it was difficult to grow. Fishing, there's no fishing on Tuesdays in Ghana because we leave the ocean a day to rest. These rules were there for a reason. And so it's not that, you don't eat it. It's that you are respectful of how you eat it. When I think about even, the way that nomadic communities are eating meat for them is their wealth, right? So you want to keep as many cows as you can. You're not slaughtering a cow every afternoon. And when you do, you're eating every single aspect of it because you know what it took to raise that cattle. So these are some of the things that I think when I think about how do we make change, I think sometimes food systems change is complicated because a lot of people need to come to the table. But at the same time, it's also as simple as us making the right decision. So I always say, like, what are you voting with your fork in the way we've decided to eat? You have made a decision about what you value. And that value is what the ecosystem is also pushing back on. When I think about some of the Scandinavian countries, when I see some of their policies, it's like, well, this is going to have a negative health outcome. So we're going to have an extra tax on that so that it covers the health sector. So like, what are we going to do? Are we going to allow the market to, how do we influence the market as well in terms of how we see things? If you look at Ghana, a lot of the negative health outcomes are foods that are for poor people or people that are, under a certain budget because they don't have the money to make better choices. So you're laboring your economy by not making some of those decisions and supporting to make sure that water is cheaper than soft drinks, or that, whatever it is that policy needs to look like. How do we think about designing the food system that we want?
System design is a very challenging thing because you've got all these different actors in a system that have individual motivations, for what drives them. Where have you seen food system design done well? And, what's the story that you see behind that? And what kind of other things would you like to see implemented in food systems around the world?
I think like the Nordic countries seem to have done a really good job thinking it through in terms of their taxation, in terms of their policies, and also putting investments in where they belong to allow certain things to happen. I would say one of the areas that we really need to think about, and I'm not saying that just because I'm an African, but when you look at population in the next, 50 years, the continent that we really need to think about is the African continent. But at the same time, we're the dumping ground. We're literally the dumping ground for everything nobody wants and no one can sell anymore. So if you think about some of the soft drinks that people are not drinking anymore in the US and in Europe, they're cheaper here than water sometimes, when you're thinking about even poultry, right? So the story around poultry in Ghana is local chicken is twice as expensive as imported chicken. Now, the imported chicken comes to Ghana cheaply for many different reasons, subsidies, farm subsidies in certain countries. Other countries, maybe the chicken has been in the freezer for too long and it's considered not safe for local consumption. So they sell it off to the continent. But when the chicken lands here, it's half the price of local chicken. And so what's going to happen is most Ghanaians are going to want to buy the cheapest one that they can, so they can feed their families. And the local poultry farmer is now going to be out of business, which means he's going to be unemployed, which means. So the question is, I don't even know who's actually making that decision about our food system, right? But we need to make that decision actively. So that's just, for me, one example. There are other examples of other things being dumped in our markets. But if we're not careful about how we support and ensure that we're making the best decisions for particularly, a very young population in the continent, we're asking for problems in the future.
And that's certainly one of the complexities of system design is all the unintended consequences. Stuart, you look like you were going to ask a question. I just wanted to jump in with that thought.
Yeah, but I think it's, from what you say, Selassie, it's about intentionality, like from at all stages, from the plate to the planet, and actually the system. And the system,
it is one system. It's actually one system, right?
Yeah. And the food system is kind of underappreciated as a system because it's on your plate in front of you.
Yeah.
You tend to forget about the political and the other forces at work in it. So in many ways, it's thinking of it as a system is the starting point as well as the end point.
Absolutely. I mean, I've been doing some research around rice and seeing and hearing about, IMF policies in the early 80s and how that's completely changed the diet in Ghana. So these are things that, unfortunately, because, food ends up being this monolith in a way, but at the same time, it's like each policy has, it's like, I guess, what is it, the butterfly effect? It's happening. And so, subsidies on rice in America in the 70s had a massive impact on rice consumption in West Africa in the 80s.
Well, that's interesting. You're Yale's inaugural Global Table Fellow, which I need to ask you about. What a wonderful title! I would love. We all aspire to be a table fellow. and you've lectured at Yale, and so another really exciting recognition of your work. So tell us more about that and your experience at Yale.
Yeah, so that was last year. And I'd done 2 events with Yale earlier where I went in to speak to them. Yale has had a long history of sort of championing plant-based, plant-forward eating, and they've worked to make sure that their campus has, I think it was around 80% plant-forward dining. Their interest in me was around the work that I'm doing in plant-forward cooking and eating based on lessons I'd learned from the African continent. And this was the 3rd invitation from them. And as a fellow, the idea was, how do we bring together programming beyond the dining hospitality space? So my first invitations were from Yale Hospitality. And the 3rd invitation was including Schwartzman Center, as well as the Macmillan Center. So these were 3 different parts of the university academic, social, and the dining services coming together. I ended up teaching a class on environmental studies. And interestingly enough, that week it was on cash crops. And so I was like, you want to talk about cocoa? Here we go. So it was really wonderful to have a chance to talk to students in the classroom, as well as get into the dining services and help students come up with a grain bowl using fonio, and them learning how easy it is to really just come up with something delicious using different ingredients. It was wonderful also being able to take over one of their dining facilities. So I created a menu that was African and was plant forward. It was based in the rooted section of the dining hall, and it ran for about 3 months. And one of the small just moments that I saw was students who were just like, I feel seen. I feel seen on the menu. I feel seen having my dishes and food that I call home here. It was also nice to see students who'd never tried it before, but were from other parts of the world, who felt a connection to it because some of the flavors felt like home. When we were doing the grain bowls, there was a student telling me about how his grandmother had made a dish, and there were flavors in that dish that was letting him think about his grandmother.
Selassie, you're a Yale Table Fellow. You're a Time honoree. You're an accomplished chef. What's next in your world? What are the things that you're working on today that our audience should know?
I'm working on a book, and it's based on lessons that I've learned from the African kitchen. And I believe that these lessons will teach us a lot and are the answers that the world is looking for to solve some of our food system change issues.
And that's in progress right now. I know from prior conversations, I think you're working on that.
Yes,
So
it's in progress. It's definitely in progress, and back to writing. So yeah.
excellent.
The other thing that I'm looking forward to working on is actually just policy work and engaging more on that. I think for me, I am ready to go much farther beyond my table in terms of creating impact, in terms of organizations that are looking for fresh perspectives, or people who actually have been working in the field and understand what some of the real bottlenecks are and the challenges that exist to creating change. So policy work, advisory work, writing.
The amazing thing about kitchens is that they touch on so many different issues, like innovation, leadership, logistics, creativity, sustainability, customer care. But they're all there. One of the things I liked, I read one of your blogs when you talked about kitchen leadership, and you said leadership looks like a chef reimagining a sauce because the market didn't have onions that day, a chocolatier tweaking a formula to work with a new harvest batch, a server reading the needs of a room better than any script. It isn't leadership by hierarchy, it's leadership by resilience, by creativity, by care, and it's women holding the fire steady. And it's a really nicely written as well. But the leadership lessons from the kitchen are incredible, and that is at the heart of your work in many ways.
Definitely. And it's interesting, like in Ghana, people don't know what to do with me. They're like, she's a cook, she's a cateress, like we don't really know. But food is at the heart of everything. You know, without food, the world does not go around. And understanding it, managing it, controlling it is the beginning of everything. If I'm not wrong, I think it was in the ancient Greek culture, the chef, priest, and the doctor were the same person because of food safety. Like, you know, you had to bless the animal. You weren't sure, you know, if you slaughtered it, it was a butcher, a priest, and the chef were like the same person because you actually had that much control and knowledge of what's happening in the system, right? So I always say we can make what nurtures us, or unfortunately, if it's done wrong, you know, it could actually have a huge negative effect on people. I always tell my team, the women that work for me, you could either kill somebody or you can nurture them. So we have all of that in our hands to move forward with.
You could kill someone or nurture someone. It's a great way to make sure people take and are purposeful and thoughtful and intentional in how they think about food. Maybe just a question to end on, Selassie, is where we started. So you were one of 7 global honorees at the Time 2025 Earth Awards. And we said some of your fellow Earth Award winners. What does an honor like that mean to you? And how are you thinking beyond the writing of your book of using the platform you now have, to create a better planet for the future?
It feels heavy sometimes, but it also feels where I want it to be and where I'm supposed to be. So for me, I will answer in a slightly long-winded way. My dad was a bit nervous. So being immigrants to the US, being the oldest child, I actually went to school to be pre-med. And when I decided that I wasn't going to do that and was going to major in environmental studies and geography, my dad was quite concerned. And then when I decided that I wanted to become a chef and go to culinary school, he was like, 2 Ivy League degrees. I can't believe this. But for me, I've always felt that it was important to have somebody who understands the importance of food and the world economy and the environment and all of these things. And so I'm grateful that my work is being seen. I'm grateful that people understand the importance of what food has to offer to the conversations around sustainability. In terms of what this means to me in the next phase, for me, it's going to be moving far beyond my table in Ghana. It's now about creating the impact that the continent needs in order to be seen as a player in sustainability and in terms of food system change. It's being able to impact policy work, both by African nations, but also by partners who are putting money into the continent or investing in the continent. And it's being able to actively create opportunities for smallholder farmers in Africa to be able to have living salaries, living wages, things that are supporting of them. And for me, that's really what this is about. It's really about having their voices, their work seen, and their work valued. And hopefully, I think and I believe that hearing and seeing all of this, it's win-win. So if we're actually sharing some of the knowledge that's coming from the continent and how we have had this resilience for so long, it's going to impact positively on the food system and in what and how others outside of the continent are eating.
We're going to have to wait a little while for the book, Selassie, by the sound of it. How do we find out more about your work now?
Yeah, you can reach me on my website. It's SelassieAtadika.com. And I'm also on LinkedIn, Selassie Atadika. And I'm sometimes on Instagram, but mostly the best way is my website.
Brilliant. A great conversation, Selassie. Leading through deliciousness. Can't get much more persuasive than that, I think. And helping us to link the plate, the planet, really important issues. And I think there are issues for Africa you've highlighted. The issues from Africa, as Steve's highlighted, the systems thinking affects everybody in the world. And it's just changing the way people think about food is a tremendous challenge, but fantastically important. So thank you very much for joining us today. Thank you, Steve. And thank you everyone for watching. We look forward to seeing you again soon. This podcast is part of an ongoing series of interviews with executives. The executives' participation in this podcast are solely for educational purposes based on their knowledge of the subject, and the views expressed by them are solely their own. Podcasts should not be deemed or construed to be for the purpose of soliciting business for any of the companies mentioned, nor does Deloitte advocate or endorse the services or products provided by these companies.